Some people think the law belongs to the loudest voice in the room, until one quiet moment reminds them that the law has a memory. The sound was so small that most people inside the station barely looked up at first. A single sheet of heavy paper tore cleanly down the middle, followed by another sharp rip that echoed beneath the fluorescent lights. Then came the laughter. Officer Daniel Mercer leaned back against the front desk with an amused grin as pieces of an official-looking document drifted toward the polished floor like pale snowflakes. Two fellow officers exchanged knowing smirks while a civilian waiting nearby lowered his eyes, unsure whether to watch or pretend nothing had happened. Across from them stood Naomi Brooks, a black woman in her late 30s dressed in a simple navy blazer, charcoal slacks, and comfortable walking shoes. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her posture relaxed despite every eye fixed on her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She didn't reach for the torn pages scattered around her feet. Instead, she watched the last fragment settle beside the reception counter as though she were memorizing every second. Mercer shook his head with exaggerated disappointment before tossing the remaining scraps into a nearby trash bin. "That federal paperwork doesn't scare anybody around here," he said loudly enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "Next time, bring something real." A few uncomfortable chuckles floated through the room, not because anyone found the joke funny, but because silence often felt safer than disagreement. Naomi slowly lifted her eyes to meet his. Her expression never changed. No anger, no fear, just an unsettling calm that lingered long enough to make even one of the younger officers glance away. "You really shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. Mercer laughed harder. "Shouldn't have," he replied. "Ma'am, you walked into the wrong station if you thought waving papers around was going to impress us." Another officer folded his arms and added, "Looks like someone watches too many courtroom dramas." The front lobby settled into an uneasy stillness. A television mounted in the corner continued broadcasting the morning news with the volume muted. A coffee machine hummed softly behind the reception desk. Somewhere down the hallway, a printer produced another stack of reports. Everything looked ordinary, almost painfully ordinary, except for the tiny white fragments covering the floor between Naomi and the officers. She glanced briefly toward the large wall clock above the entrance. 10:23. Her attention lingered there for only a second before she reached into her purse and removed her phone. Without hurry, without secrecy, she typed a single sentence, pressed send, and slipped the phone back inside. Mercer noticed and smirked. "Calling your lawyer?" Naomi answered with the faintest hint of a smile. "No, then who?" he asked. She looked directly at him. "The people who issued the warrant you just destroyed." For the first time that morning, the laughter faded just enough for the room to notice the strange confidence in her voice. Outside, beyond the tinted glass doors of the station, a distant line of black SUVs turned onto the street, still several blocks away, their approach unnoticed by everyone except the woman who calmly checked the clock one more time. The lobby remained strangely quiet after Naomi's words, but quiet did not mean understanding. Officer Daniel Mercer simply rolled his shoulders as though the conversation had already ended in his favor. He reached for a fresh cup of coffee, exchanged another confident grin with Officer Kyle Bennett, and brushed invisible dust from the front of his uniform. To them, nothing significant had happened. It was another ordinary weekday inside a busy city police station where paperwork piled high, dispatch radios crackled without pause, and citizens came seeking answers that often arrived too slowly. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall front windows, casting long reflections across the polished tile floor where tiny pieces of the torn document still rested unnoticed. A maintenance worker pushed a cart toward the entrance, paused for a moment after noticing the scattered paper, then quietly continued down another hallway without asking questions. Years of working inside government buildings had taught him that sometimes silence was the safest decision. Naomi remained exactly where she was. She neither protested nor demanded an apology. Instead, she observed every detail surrounding her with remarkable patience. The names displayed on officers' badges, the security cameras mounted near the ceiling, the digital visitor log glowing behind the reception counter. Even the clock continued its steady rhythm, each passing second carrying a quiet importance that no one else seemed to recognize. A woman waiting to report a stolen bicycle glanced toward Naomi with visible concern before finally gathering enough courage to step closer. In a gentle voice she whispered, "Are you all right?" Naomi answered with the same calm expression she had worn since entering the building. "I will be." The woman looked toward the officers, hesitated, then slowly returned to her seat without another word. Daniel Mercer noticed the brief exchange and chuckled. "People always think staying calm makes them look powerful," he said loudly. "Sometimes it just means they know they already lost." Several officers nearby smiled politely, although one rookie named Evan Ross remained unusually quiet. He had only been wearing the badge for 8 months, and something about the entire situation continued to bother him. He glanced toward the trash bin where the torn pages had disappeared, then toward Naomi, whose confidence did not match someone facing defeat. He leaned toward Sergeant Kyle Bennett and quietly asked, "Did anyone actually read that document before it was destroyed?" Bennett barely looked at him. "It was just another piece of paper," he answered dismissively. "Do not overthink it." Evan nodded, but the uneasy feeling remained. Naomi slowly walked toward one of the empty chairs along the waiting area and sat down with remarkable composure. She folded her hands neatly across her lap and looked toward the entrance as though expecting an ordinary appointment rather than a confrontation. Outside, traffic continued flowing through downtown streets, while pedestrians crossed intersections carrying coffee cups and briefcases, completely unaware that only a few blocks away a sequence of decisions had already begun changing the course of several careers. Inside the station, dispatch announced another routine call over the radio. Officers prepared to leave for unrelated assignments, unaware that every movement inside the building had quietly become part of a much larger timeline. Then something almost too subtle to notice happened. The reception computer suddenly displayed a brief connection warning before returning to normal. Another terminal flickered for only a second. Officer Bennett frowned and tapped his keyboard. "That is strange," he muttered. Daniel Mercer barely looked up. "Probably another system update," he replied confidently before taking another sip of coffee. Naomi heard the exchange, but said nothing. Instead, she looked once more at the wall clock. 10:28. 5 minutes had passed since her message was sent, and somewhere beyond the station walls, engines continued drawing closer. Officer Evan Ross could not explain why the silence felt heavier with every passing minute. He had worked enough shifts to recognize ordinary frustration, ordinary complaints, and ordinary misunderstandings, but this was different. The woman sitting quietly near the front entrance showed none of the signs he expected. She was not making phone calls to reporters. She was not demanding a supervisor. She was not arguing with anyone. She simply waited with the steady patience of someone who already knew how the story would end. Daniel Mercer, meanwhile, continued moving through the station with complete confidence. He greeted detectives walking through the hallway, signed routine paperwork, and joked with dispatch about another long week ahead. Every laugh seemed louder than before, as though he wanted the entire building to know he remained in control. He glanced toward Naomi once more and called across the lobby. "Still waiting for your miracle?" Naomi slowly looked up from her seat. "No," she answered softly. "I am waiting for procedure." The answer earned another round of amused smiles from several officers nearby. Mercer shook his head. "Procedure works for people who understand how things actually operate." Naomi offered no reply. Her attention shifted briefly toward the security camera positioned above the entrance before returning to the clock. 10:32. Outside, the city continued moving through another ordinary morning. Delivery trucks stopped at nearby businesses. A school bus rolled through the intersection 1 block away. Office workers hurried toward downtown buildings carrying breakfast and steaming coffee. Nothing suggested that anything unusual was about to happen. Yet only a short distance from the station, several dark vehicles turned onto the same avenue without using lights or sirens, blending almost effortlessly into normal traffic. Inside the station, another subtle change passed almost unnoticed. The reception computer refreshed unexpectedly before displaying a secure login screen unfamiliar to Officer Kyle Bennett. He frowned and tapped several keys, but the display remained unchanged. "Dispatch, are we having network maintenance?" he asked over the internal radio. The dispatcher answered after a brief pause. "Negative. Everything shows normal from here." Bennett frowned harder. "That is strange." Daniel Mercer waved dismissively. "Technology fails every day. Stop worrying about it." Evan Ross looked toward Naomi again. She had not even glanced at the computer. Instead, she seemed to be listening, almost as though she expected every small detail to arrive exactly on schedule. That quiet certainty unsettled him more than any angry confrontation could have. A gray-haired attorney entering the station slowed as he recognized Naomi sitting alone. His eyes widened slightly before he approached with careful respect. "Ms. Brooks," he said politely, "I did not expect to see you here." Naomi stood and offered a courteous handshake. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison." The attorney looked around the lobby before lowering his voice. "Did everything go according to plan?" Naomi paused for only a heartbeat. "Not exactly. Some unexpected decisions were made." Harrison followed her gaze toward the overflowing trash bin near the reception desk. His expression changed immediately. "They destroyed it?" Naomi gave a small nod. He inhaled slowly, choosing his next words. "With care." That document carried a federal seal. Several nearby officers overheard the conversation but reacted with visible indifference. Mercer folded his arms and stepped closer. "If you have business here, counselor, you can speak with the front desk. Otherwise, you are holding up the lobby." Harrison met Mercer's eyes without raising his voice. "Officer, I sincerely hope you documented everything that happened this morning." Mercer smiled confidently. "There is nothing to document." Harrison glanced once toward Naomi before quietly answering. "That is usually when documentation becomes most important." Naomi looked through the glass entrance doors as faint reflections of approaching black vehicles became visible in the distance, still far enough away that no one else inside the station paid them any attention. She checked the wall clock one final time. 10:35. Right on schedule. Daniel Mercer watched the attorney leave with the confidence of someone who believed the conversation had changed nothing. He straightened the nameplate on the reception counter and let out a slow laugh that echoed through the lobby. "People love making simple paperwork sound dramatic," he said to the officers nearby. "A seal on a document does not magically make someone important." A few quiet chuckles followed, although they sounded noticeably weaker than before. Officer Evan Ross remained silent, unable to shake the uneasy feeling growing inside him. He glanced once more toward the trash bin where the torn pages remained buried beneath discarded coffee cups and routine reports. Something about destroying an unfamiliar federal document without verification no longer felt like a harmless decision. Naomi Brooks slowly rose from her chair as though responding to an invisible schedule. She walked toward the reception desk with the same measured pace she had maintained since entering the station. Every movement appeared deliberate, calm, and completely free of panic. Mercer folded his arms with a confident smile. "Did you finally decide to leave?" he asked. Naomi looked directly at him. "I came to give you one more opportunity." He raised an eyebrow. "Opportunity for what?" "To correct what happened before it becomes much harder to correct." Mercer laughed again, louder this time. "There is nothing to correct." Naomi nodded gently, almost sympathetically. "That answer is now part of the record." Mercer leaned slightly across the counter, lowering his voice just enough for those nearby to hear every word. "Let me explain something. You walked in here expecting everyone to believe whatever story you brought with you. Around here, respect is earned, not carried inside a folder." Naomi remained perfectly composed. "Respect is earned," she agreed. "Accountability is unavoidable." The conversation drew the attention of nearly everyone in the lobby. Detectives paused in the hallway. A dispatcher stepped out from the communications room. Even the maintenance worker stopped pushing his cart for a brief moment. No one interrupted. No one spoke. The station seemed suspended in an uncomfortable silence that grew heavier with every passing second. Mercer finally gestured toward the front entrance with an exaggerated wave of his hand. "You have been sitting here long enough. Unless you have actual business left, I think it is time for you to move along." Naomi did not argue. She simply reached into her purse, removed a small leather notebook, opened it, and wrote a single line before placing it back inside. Mercer smirked. "Keeping a diary?" "Documenting the timeline," she answered. "Every minute matters." Before Mercer could respond, a soft electronic tone echoed from somewhere inside the building. One computer screen dimmed unexpectedly. Then another. A detective frowned as his secure case management system suddenly logged him out. Across the room, a printer stopped halfway through a report before displaying a message that no one had seen before. Officer Kyle Bennett tapped his keyboard repeatedly. Why is everything disconnecting? He muttered. Dispatch answered over the internal radio, sounding noticeably more confused than earlier. Multiple systems are reporting restricted access. We are trying to determine the source. Mercer rolled his eyes. It is another software issue. Everybody relax. Yet even as he spoke, his own workstation displayed a secure government notification replacing the normal login screen. He frowned for the first time that morning. The room grew quieter still. Naomi glanced toward the glass entrance doors. Reflected in the sunlight outside, several dark sport utility vehicles eased to a smooth stop along the curb. Their engines fell silent one after another with quiet precision. No emergency lights flashed. No sirens sounded. The only sound was the steady ticking of the wall clock as it reached 10:38. Naomi looked back at Mercer with the same calm expression she had worn since the beginning. "Officer," she said gently, "your opportunity has expired." The uneasy silence inside the station deepened until even the familiar sounds of ringing telephones and distant conversations seemed to fade into the background. Daniel Mercer stared at the government notification glowing across his computer monitor before pressing several keys with growing impatience. Nothing changed. The login screen remained locked beneath a message he had never encountered during his entire career. Officer Kyle Bennett experienced the same result at the neighboring terminal. One by one, detectives attempted to access case files, incident reports, and internal records, only to discover that every secure function had quietly become unavailable. "Dispatch, confirm network status again," Bennett said into the radio. This time the response arrived after several tense seconds. "We are receiving the same alert across multiple systems. We have no control from this end." The answer was followed by an unfamiliar tone that briefly echoed through the communications speakers before disappearing into silence. Evan Ross slowly stepped closer to the reception counter, watching the expressions around him change from confidence to confusion. No one understood why every system had shifted at exactly the same moment. No one except Naomi Brooks, who remained perfectly composed near the entrance. She neither celebrated nor reacted. She simply watched the room with calm, patient eyes, as though every event unfolding before her had already been accounted for long before she walked through the front doors. "Daniel." Mercer finally looked away from his frozen monitor and toward Naomi. "What exactly did you do?" he demanded. Naomi answered without hesitation. "I followed procedure." Mercer frowned. "You expect me to believe all of this happened because of one message?" Naomi met his gaze steadily. "No. It happened because of decisions that were already made. My message simply informed the appropriate people that those decisions had been completed." The words settled over the lobby with surprising weight. Even those who had laughed earlier no longer found anything amusing. A detective quietly picked up his office telephone, only to discover that internal lines had shifted to a restricted routing system displaying a government verification prompt. Another officer attempted to unlock a digital evidence cabinet, but the electronic access panel displayed a temporary security hold instead of the usual authorization screen. Confused voices spread through the building as more departments reported identical problems. A clerk hurried from the records division carrying several folders before stopping abruptly at the reception desk. "All evidence transfers have been paused," she said nervously. "The system says external oversight is pending." Mercer reached for the nearest folder, hoping to find an explanation, but every page inside carried only routine paperwork unrelated to the growing disruption. Outside, sunlight reflected across the windshields of the black sport utility vehicles now parked neatly along the curb. Their engines remained off. Their doors remained closed. From inside the station, they appeared almost ordinary. Yet something about their precise arrival made Evan Ross instinctively straighten his posture. He had seen coordinated federal operations only once before during academy training, and the quiet discipline surrounding those vehicles felt strangely familiar. Naomi glanced through the glass entrance before returning her attention to the officers. "You still have time to cooperate," she said gently. "Cooperation always matters." Mercer forced a confident smile, although it no longer reached his eyes. "Nobody is locking down this station over a misunderstanding." Naomi answered with the same steady calm that had never left her voice. "It is no longer a misunderstanding." At that exact moment, the main entrance doors unlocked automatically with a soft electronic click, and several shadows became visible through the glass as a group of professionally dressed officials approached the building in perfect silence. The front doors opened without urgency, yet every conversation inside the station stopped at once. 6 men and 4 women entered in dark business suits, each wearing a visible federal credential clipped neatly to a jacket or carried inside a leather holder. Their movements were calm, disciplined, and remarkably quiet. No one rushed. No one raised a voice. They simply walked with the confidence of people who already knew exactly where they belonged. The person leading the group was a tall man with silver at his temples and a composed expression that revealed nothing. He paused just inside the entrance and slowly surveyed the lobby before speaking in a steady, measured voice. "Good morning. I am Supervisory Special Agent Ethan Walker with the Federal Compliance Task Force." His words echoed across the suddenly silent room. Officer Daniel Mercer instinctively stepped forward, forcing a professional smile despite the growing uncertainty on his face. "Can I help you?" Walker held his credential where everyone could clearly see it. "You can begin by preserving the current condition of this facility." Mercer frowned. "What exactly is this about?" Walker did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward 2 members of his team, who quietly separated and positioned themselves near opposite hallways. Another agent approached the reception counter and placed a sealed folder on the polished surface without opening it. Every movement appeared rehearsed with remarkable precision. Evan Ross noticed something else that made his heartbeat quicken. None of the agents showed surprise upon seeing Naomi Brooks. In fact, several acknowledged her with subtle nods of professional respect before returning to their assignments. Naomi simply nodded back, saying nothing. Mercer noticed the exchange immediately. "Do you know these people?" he asked, turning toward Naomi. "Yes," she answered calmly. "We have been working together for quite some time." The statement landed like a stone in still water. Kyle Bennett exchanged a nervous glance with another detective. The attorney, Richard Harrison, who had remained near the entrance after finishing a phone call, quietly removed his glasses and watched without speaking. Walker finally turned his full attention toward the reception desk. "Who is the supervising officer currently responsible for this facility?" A lieutenant emerged from an interior office, adjusting his jacket as he approached. "Lieutenant Harold Simmons." "What seems to be the issue?" Walker offered a courteous nod. "Lieutenant Simmons, effective immediately, this building is subject to a federal administrative preservation order. Until further notice, no documents, electronic records, evidence, or communication devices are to be removed, altered, or destroyed." The lieutenant blinked in visible confusion. "Administrative preservation?" Walker reached into the folder and carefully removed a professionally printed order bearing multiple federal seals. "Yes, sir." He handed the document to Simmons, who read the first page in growing disbelief. Mercer stepped closer. "This cannot be serious." Walker looked directly at him. "It is entirely serious." The room remained so quiet that the faint hum of the ceiling lights became impossible to ignore. One of the agents quietly placed temporary security labels over several evidence room access panels. Another began photographing the reception area, including the trash bin positioned beside the front desk. Evan followed the camera with his eyes until he suddenly understood what the agent was documenting. The torn pieces of paper. Mercer noticed the same thing and instinctively looked toward the trash bin before returning his attention to Walker. "What are you looking for?" Walker answered with calm precision. "We are identifying the location where a federally protected sealed warrant was reportedly destroyed." No one laughed this time. No one moved. Even the air inside the station seemed to grow heavier as every pair of eyes slowly turned toward the same trash bin resting only a few feet from the reception counter. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The ordinary confidence that had filled the station only minutes earlier had quietly disappeared, replaced by uncertainty that spread from one officer to the next. Supervisory Special Agent Ethan Walker remained composed as another member of the task force carefully retrieved the trash bin from beside the reception counter and placed it on a clean evidence table. Wearing protective gloves, the agent began separating the contents one piece at a time. Coffee cups, routine memorandums, receipts. Then, one after another, the torn fragments of the sealed warrant appeared. Every piece was photographed before being carefully arranged across a large evidence sheet. Daniel Mercer stared at the table without saying a word. The realization slowly settled across the room that the document everyone had dismissed only moments before had instantly become the most important object inside the building. Lieutenant Harold Simmons looked toward Walker with growing concern. "Is this really enough to justify a federal preservation order?" Walker answered calmly. "The order was authorized before we arrived. What happened inside this station determined what happened next." Simmons lowered his eyes to the reconstructed pages. Several sections of the federal seal remained clearly visible despite the damage. An agent quietly compared each fragment with an electronic reference displayed on a secured government tablet. "Verification confirmed," she announced. "Document identity matches the original issuance record." The words landed heavily across the silent lobby. Officer Evan Ross slowly closed the notebook he had been holding. His earlier doubts had transformed into certainty. Naomi Brooks had told the truth from the very beginning. She had never exaggerated. She had never threatened anyone. She had simply described what would happen if procedure was ignored. Walker finally turned toward Naomi. "Ms. Brooks, can you confirm whether these are the remains of the warrant issued to you this morning?" Naomi stepped forward with steady confidence. She examined the reconstructed pages carefully before nodding once. "Yes, those are the original fragments." Walker recorded her response before asking another question. "Did anyone instruct you to surrender the document voluntarily?" "Yes," Naomi replied. "I presented it for official review after identifying myself." "Were you given an opportunity to recover the document before it was destroyed?" "No." Walker acknowledged her answer with a brief nod before writing several notes inside a leather portfolio. Daniel Mercer finally found his voice. "Nobody intended to interfere with anything. We thought the paperwork was meaningless." Walker looked directly at him. "Intent is one matter. Actions are another. Federal procedures exist precisely because assumptions can compromise lawful processes." Mercer opened his mouth as though searching for another explanation, but none came. Around him, the officers who had laughed earlier now avoided eye contact altogether. Even Kyle Bennett remained silent, his attention fixed on the reconstructed warrant lying beneath the evidence lights. Richard Harrison quietly approached Naomi. "I believe everything has now been documented exactly as expected," he said softly. Naomi answered with quiet composure. "Almost everything." Harrison looked at her with mild curiosity. "What remains?" Naomi glanced toward the security cameras mounted above the reception desk. "The recordings." Walker overheard the exchange and immediately addressed one of his specialists. "Secure every surveillance recording beginning 1 hour before Ms. Brooks entered the building. Create verified copies before any routine system override occurs." "Yes, sir," the specialist replied. Within seconds, portable forensic equipment was connected to the station recording system. Progress indicators appeared across several screens as protected copies began transferring under federal chain of custody. The room watched in complete silence while every minute of the morning was preserved exactly as it had happened. Naomi quietly folded her hands once more. She had never needed to argue. She had only needed the truth to be recorded. The final transfer indicator reached 100%, and a quiet confirmation tone echoed through the station. Every surveillance recording, every access log, and every preserved record had been secured under federal chain of custody. Supervisory Special Agent Ethan Walker closed the evidence portfolio and looked across the room with the calm confidence of someone whose work had already been completed before anyone realized it had begun. "The preservation phase is finished," he announced. "We will now proceed with formal review." No one objected. Lieutenant Harold Simmons slowly removed his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, the weight of the morning finally becoming impossible to ignore. Daniel Mercer stood motionless beside the reception counter, his earlier confidence replaced by quiet disbelief. He looked toward Naomi Brooks as though seeing her for the first time. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Naomi met his eyes without satisfaction or anger. "My name is Naomi Brooks." She paused only briefly before continuing. "Lead federal compliance investigator assigned to the Joint Public Integrity Review Program." The room remained perfectly still. Several officers exchanged stunned glances while Evan Ross lowered his eyes, remembering every calm warning Naomi had given since she first entered the building. Walker continued the introduction. Ms. Brooks has spent the past 9 months coordinating a multi-agency review involving evidence handling procedures, administrative compliance, and public integrity standards across multiple jurisdictions. Today's scheduled document delivery was an authorized operational step within that review. Richard Harrison quietly added, "The sealed warrant was intentionally delivered through standard procedure because lawful procedure is the only reliable way to measure institutional conduct." Mercer struggled to process the explanation. "You mean this was some kind of test?" Walker answered carefully, "No, Officer Mercer. It was an official legal process. The outcome depended entirely upon the choices made inside this building." Those words settled over everyone present with unmistakable clarity. Naomi slowly opened her leather portfolio and removed another folder bearing identical federal markings. She placed it gently on the reception counter. "Every protected document issued by our office exists in multiple authenticated forms," she explained. "The original you destroyed was never the only copy. However, your decision to destroy it became an official event requiring independent review. An agent displayed a secure digital record showing the document's issuance time, verification code, and preservation history. Every detail matched the reconstructed fragments recovered from the trash bin. There was no uncertainty left." Walker looked toward the assembled officers. "This review concerns conduct, not assumptions. Every person present will have an opportunity to provide a complete statement under established procedures." His tone remained respectful, free of accusation, and firmly professional. Evan Ross finally spoke. "I witnessed the entire interaction from the beginning." Walker acknowledged him with a grateful nod. "Your cooperation will become part of the official record." Naomi glanced around the station one final time. The same lobby that had greeted her with dismissive laughter now stood in thoughtful silence. Nothing about the building itself had changed. The desks remained where they had always been. The lights still hummed overhead. The wall clock continued measuring every passing second. The only difference was that everyone inside now understood that every decision, every word, and every action had carried consequences far beyond what they had imagined. Naomi quietly closed her portfolio and looked toward the entrance where morning sunlight filled the glass doors. "Procedure protects everyone," she said gently, "but only when everyone chooses to respect it." The afternoon sun cast long reflections across the station lobby as the federal team completed the final steps of their review. The atmosphere had changed completely. Earlier that morning, confident laughter had echoed through the building. Now every conversation was measured, every decision deliberate, and every person understood that professionalism was no longer an expectation but an obligation. Supervisory Special Agent Ethan Walker gathered the completed evidence portfolios before addressing Lieutenant Harold Simmons one final time. "Our responsibility today was to preserve the facts exactly as they occurred. The administrative review will continue through the appropriate federal and local channels." Simmons nodded respectfully. "You have my full cooperation." Walker offered a courteous handshake before turning toward Naomi Brooks. "Thank you for your professionalism throughout this process." Naomi returned the gesture with the same quiet composure that had defined every moment since she first entered the station. The process worked because everyone eventually chose to let the evidence speak for itself. Nearby, Officer Evan Ross quietly watched the exchange. He realized that the most important lesson from the morning had not come from a courtroom, a lecture, or an academy manual. It had come from observing someone who refused to answer disrespect with anger and refused to answer assumptions with emotion. Instead, she trusted lawful procedure, careful documentation, and patience. Daniel Mercer remained near the reception counter, looking at the reconstructed warrant one final time before an evidence specialist carefully secured it inside a protective folder. His shoulders no longer carried the certainty that had greeted Naomi only hours earlier. After a long silence, he finally stepped toward her. "Ms. Brooks," he said quietly, "I should have listened before making assumptions." Naomi regarded him with calm sincerity. "Listening is where accountability begins." Mercer lowered his eyes. "I understand that now." Naomi did not celebrate his admission. She simply nodded once. Understanding is valuable when it leads to better decisions tomorrow. Those standing nearby heard every word. There was no applause. There was no dramatic confrontation. Only a quiet recognition that respect could never be demanded through authority alone. It had to be demonstrated through conduct. As the federal agents prepared to leave, the temporary security notices were carefully documented, the preserved evidence was transferred under established procedures, and normal operations slowly began returning to the station. Officers resumed answering calls. Detectives returned to their offices. Citizens waiting in the lobby were assisted with renewed professionalism. The building looked almost exactly as it had that morning, yet everyone inside knew it was no longer the same place. Before walking through the front doors, Naomi paused for a brief moment and looked back across the lobby. The wall clock continued its steady rhythm, marking another ordinary minute in an ordinary building. Yet for everyone who had witnessed the events of the day, that ordinary minute would be remembered for years to come. She stepped outside into the warm daylight as the line of black vehicles quietly departed behind her, leaving the station standing not as a symbol of embarrassment, but as a reminder that public trust depends upon integrity, fairness, and respect for every person who walks through its doors. Some people believe that destroying a document erases the truth. They forget that the truth is never carried by paper alone. It lives in every honest witness, every recorded fact, every lawful process, and every person willing to stand with dignity even when standing alone. On that morning, a torn warrant did not weaken justice. It revealed exactly where justice was needed most.